In case you're unfamiliar, Bitwarden is a free open source password manager and my password manager of choice. These days, everyone needs a password manager. If you don't use one, either you're using weak passwords or you're using the same password across multiple accounts, which is also bad practice. One cool feature of Bitwarden is the ability to host your own Bitwarden server, and that's what I'm going to show you in this video. Now, you are going to need a couple of prerequisites before you can begin. The first is a computer to use as your server. Can be either physical or virtual. The second is a domain name for your server. You can either purchase one from a registrar or get a free subdomain from a dynamic DNS provider like Dinu or NoIP. Now, you have to have a domain name pointing to your server in order to obtain an SSL certificate from Let's Encrypt, which is required for Bitwarden client applications to connect to your server. Now, in this video, I'm going to be doing this on Ubuntu Server. But with that said, let's get right into it. So, the very first thing you're going to have to do is obviously get a copy of Ubuntu Server. You can get it by going to ubuntu.com/download/server, and I would recommend going with the latest LTS version, 24.04.2 LTS at the time of making this video. I recommend staying away from using short-term intermediary releases and only use long-term support or LTS versions, because LTS versions are supported for 5 years as opposed to 9 months, and they're generally more stable and have a lot more community support. So you're gonna click download on that, and then it'll start downloading the ISO file, which I actually already have downloaded. Now, if you're installing this on a physical machine, then your next step is to flash this to a flash drive, which I'm assuming most of you know how to do that, but in case you don't, I've made another video covering how to do that. I'll link that up in the card and down in the description. If you're doing this in a virtual machine, just make sure your network settings are set to bridged mode, as pictured here. I'm using VirtualBox in this video, because you need this to get an IP address directly from your router or DHCP server. But once you've got that set up, you can start up the virtual machine or insert your Ubuntu installation drive into your physical machine and then boot it up, and then start it from your Ubuntu installation media, then hit try or install Ubuntu Server. And then once you get to the install screen, select your language, keyboard layout, and then I would choose Ubuntu Server as your base installation. And if you're doing this on a physical machine, I would also select search for third-party drivers by coming down to it and then hitting the space bar. For a virtual machine, this doesn't really matter. Now, when you get to the network configuration, it's going to give you an IP address assigned by DHCP. Now, for a server, I would set up a static IP so that it never changes. But I'm going to quickly show you what it's like to configure a static IP. So you're going to come up here to your network interface, hit enter, select edit IPv4, and then change IPv4 method to manual. And in the subnet field, you're going to put network address of your network, which for most people is 192.168.0 or 1.0/24. Or, like, that's the way that it wants you to put it in the subnet field. It wants what's known as a sitter address. And the /24 represents the subnet mask 255.255.255.0. And by the way, you can get your network configuration from a computer already connected to your network. If your network's set up a little bit differently, I'll leave a link to a subnet calculator down in the description. But anyway, then you're going to select your address. For example, 192.168.1.224. In my example, I'm just using the IP address that I got from DHCP. Just whatever address you pick, make sure that it's, first of all, within your IP range, and make sure that that IP address is not assigned. So for /24 network, that would be the first 3 octets or portions are the same, and the 4th one is what actually changes. And also check your router settings to make sure that that IP address isn't being used already. And then once you've got this all set up, then I would go into your router settings and set up a DHCP reservation for your server to exclude this address from being handed out by DHCP. Now we got past the hard part of it. And now just punch in your gateway address, which you can get from any computer already connected to your network. For me, it's 192.168.1.1. And then for named servers, pick whichever DNS servers you like. I personally like to use Cloudflare's, which are 1.1.1.1 and 1.0.0.1. Nice and easy to remember. And search domains you can leave blank, and then hit save. And then that should change to static. Just wait for it to apply our changes, and done. If you have a proxy server, you can define it here, but for most people, you can just leave this blank, and then it'll go test the default mirror location. This is also where if you have your own Ubuntu mirror, you can put that in here, but for most people, you just leave this default. Well, it'll just go quickly test either the default mirror or whatever mirror you put in, and this is also a good test to make sure that your network configuration is working properly. Yep, our mirror passed the test, so we're going to hit done. And then for our storage configuration, if you just want to keep things as simple as possible, I would use an entire disk, which actually, maybe it's a good time to double check to make sure that there's nothing on this disk that you need, because it will be erased. And then I would disable using this disk as an LVM group just to keep things simple. But anyway, now I'm going to hit done. And then it's going to give you a summary of the changes. Then hit done. And then once you've double checked that you're okay with this drive being erased, hit continue, and then it'll start installing. And now this is where you set up your user account on your server. So just type in your name and then punch in your server's name. I'm just going to call this Bitwarden. Then pick a username, password, confirm your password, then hit done. And then if you want to attach this to a Ubuntu Pro subscription, then this is actually a good time to do it right here. But I'm actually going to skip this just for the purposes of this video. And I would check install OpenSSH server, so then we can work from our own computer instead of directly with the server. And if you have an SSH key registered on GitHub or Launchpad, this is where you can import it here, which then would allow you to disable password authentication and just use strictly key-based authentication, which I've gone over advantages of doing that in another video. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to use a good old password. And now it's basically going to show you popular server snaps that you can install right now. We can skip this. And then just wait for it to install. And then once it's done, just hit reboot now. And then remove the installation drive, then press enter, and then it'll boot into your new Ubuntu server installation. And then once this finishes booting up, we can work from here, but you might prefer to work from your own computer instead. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So on your computer, open up your terminal, then type SSH, your username, and this is your username on the server, not on your computer, at your server's IP address, which in my case is 192.168.1.224. And then the first time connecting, tell you that it can't verify the authenticity of your server. We're going to say yes to that, and then it'll add your server to the list of known hosts. Now just enter your password that you've set up on the server, and now we're in. So now, on a new Ubuntu server installation, the first thing we always do is install any updates by doing a sudo apt update to check for updates. And it looks like we got some updates to install. So then we do a sudo apt upgrade to install these updates. Hit yes to install the updates. The next step is to install Bitwarden Server. Now there's a few ways to do this, but the easiest way that I'm going to show you is through Docker, which, in case you're unfamiliar, that's another package manager for Linux. So now in order to use Docker to install Bitwarden, first we've got to install Docker on this. Let me show you how to do that. By the way, these same instructions are available on Docker's official website. So first I'm going to do a sudo install -m0755-d/etc/apt/keyrings. Right now I'm importing Docker's GPG key so that apt can verify the authenticity of the Docker package, because otherwise apt will refuse to install it by default. So next I'm going to do a sudo curl -fs capital S capital L, and lowercase / uppercase is important here, https://download.docker.com/linux/ubuntu/gpg -o/etc/apt/keyrings/docker.asc. So now I've downloaded Docker's GPG key. So now we're going to change the permissions on that with the sudo chmod a+r/etc/apt/keyrings/docker.asc. And by the way, all these commands will be in the description, so you can just copy and paste. And then the next command is a really long one. So this is actually the benefit of working from SSH, because then you can just copy and paste. But anyway, you're just going to copy and paste in this really long command. Again, it'll be in the description. And this will basically add Docker's repository to your apt or Ubuntu's /Debian's package manager, which will then allow us to install Docker. So let's go do that right now. We've actually got to install quite a few packages. But again, you can just copy and paste. Then hit enter. Oh, actually, before we can do that, we've got to do a sudo apt update so that it sees our new Docker repository. So now we can run the sudo apt install Docker command, and then hit yes to install. All right, so now that Docker is installed, the next thing we got to do before we can actually install Bitwarden is to create a Bitwarden user and directory. So first of all, I'm going to create the Bitwarden user with sudo add user Bitwarden, then pick a password for it, and then confirm it. And then you can fill these out if you like, or just leave them blank. And now we've got to create a Docker group with sudo add group Docker. Oh, it already exists. So now we can add our Bitwarden user to the Docker group with sudo add user Bitwarden Docker. Now our Bitwarden user is now a member of the Docker group. So now we've got to create a directory for Bitwarden with sudo mkdir /opt/Bitwarden. Now the next thing we got to do is change the permissions on that newly created directory so that only the Bitwarden user can read and modify it. So I'm going to do sudo chmod 700/opt/Bitwarden. And now we got to change the owner of it to our Bitwarden user and group by doing sudo chown bitwarden :bitwarden /opt/bitwarden. So now that we've done that, the next thing we got to do before we can install Bitwarden is to set up port forwarding on our router and create our DNS records to point our domain or subdomain to our public IP address. And you have to do this, otherwise we won't be able to get a certificate from Let's Encrypt, and without that, our clients will fail to connect to our Bitwarden server. So let me show you how to do that. Now, I'm in my router settings right now. Now, unfortunately, this is something where pretty much every single router is going to be different. So unfortunately, you might need to go into your router's manual to figure out how exactly to set up port forwarding on yours. But for most consumer routers, you can access the router settings with the gateway IP address listed in your network configuration. But now I'm going to go into my port forwarding settings. Luckily for most consumer routers, it's actually not too difficult to set up. So now I'm going to add a rule. I'll just give it any name I like. I'll just call this Bitwarden. And then local IP is the IP address of your server. And then you're going to forward TCP port 80 and 443. And now I'm going to hit apply and then save it. And now that port forwarding rule is enabled. Now I'm going to go set up my DNS record. All right, so now I'm in my domain registrar's DNS settings. For my video, I'm using an actual domain that I've purchased. The same principle applies to a free dynamic DNS provider. But anyway, I'm going to add a record. By the way, I'm with Cloudflare registrar. And now I'm going to create an A record pointing to my public IP address. This is important. This has to point to your public IP address. Otherwise, first of all, you're not going to be able to get your certificate because Let's Encrypt's Acme challenge servers will fail if their servers can't contact your server. In my case, for name, I'm going to do Bitwarden. So my subdomain is going to be bitwarden.drewhowdentech.com. And by the way, I'm going to wipe this out after I'm finished, so don't bother going after this instance. Now, if you're using a free dynamic DNS provider that just gives you a subdomain, then this is not applicable. But now when we come to where you put the IPv4 address, and this is important, you need to put your public IP address assigned to your router by your ISP, not the local IP of your server. You can get your public IP address from a website like whatismyipaddress.com, and then this has to be your IPv4 address. We're not going to worry about IPv6 in this video, so pardon me while I punch that in. All right, and once we've done that, now we can finally install Bitwarden. To do that, first of all, we got to switch to our Bitwarden user. Now, you could log out and then log back in as the Bitwarden user, but here's a shortcut. Just do su for switch user, Bitwarden, then punch in the password for your Bitwarden user, and then you're in. Now we need to change to our Bitwarden directory with cd/opt/Bitwarden. Okay, and then double check that you're logged in as your Bitwarden user and in your Bitwarden directory, and then copy and paste this long command, also from the description, to download Bitwarden, and then we can do /bitwarden.sh install, which will then launch Bitwarden Server's interactive installer. The first thing it's going to do is ask us for the domain name for our server. In my case, bitwarden.drewhowdentech.com. Then hit enter. And yes, we want to use Let's Encrypt to generate a free SSL certificate so that it's trusted by our Bitwarden clients. And then it's going to ask for an email address. And then it'll start downloading Bitwarden from Docker, and then it'll generate our certificate, and yep, it successfully retrieved our certificate, and that's valid for 90 days. Should automatically renew within 30 days of expiry. But anyway, now we're gonna pick a database name for our Bitwarden instance. You can choose Vault, or you can make up a name. I would actually make up a name here, like secret name. Now, once you've set this is one of those things that you can't change, or would cause a lot of problems and a lot of things to break if you were to change it. Okay, now the very next thing it's gonna do is ask for an installation ID. We can get that from bitwarden.com/host, then scroll down to where it'll ask for an email address, and then your region. If you're in the EU, then I would go with bitwarden.eu. If you're outside the EU, then I would go with United States. I'm in Canada, so I'm gonna go with United States, and then hit submit. And then it's gonna give you an installation ID and installation key. Again, like, this is just a dummy temporary setup that I just for demonstration purposes. So by the time you see this video, this won't exist. But anyway, you're gonna copy your installation ID, paste it in here, hit enter, then it'll ask for our installation key, copy that, paste it in here, and then select your region. US is selected by default, so we'll go with that. If you've selected EU, make sure you type EU here. Alright, so now it finished installing Bitwarden. Now next we actually have to start it with /bitwarden.sh start. And then it's gonna pull all the packages that we need to start our server. This will actually take a little while, so be patient, depending on the speed of your internet connection. Alright, and then once that command finishes, our Bitwarden server will be up and running. So now, if we come into our web browser and then go to our server's domain, now our web vault will load up. As we could see now, it brings us to the Bitwarden login page. You can create an account from here, but you might prefer to use a client or an official Bitwarden app. So to do that, just open up the app, and then on the login screen, at the bottom here where it has this little text saying accessing bitwarden.com, click on bitwarden.com and then change this to self-hosted. Put in your server's address, bitwarden.druidandtech.com in my case. Now we're going to create an account, punch in your email address, and then just type in your name. Then create a master password. And make sure that's a strong password, because if you don't have a strong password on your password manager, well, that is how you get pwned. All right, and we're in. Now, as you could see, I'm in my new account that I created on bitwarden.druidandtech.com. And by the way, you can do the same thing with all the Bitwarden apps, including mobile apps and browser extensions. Now, if you have a dynamic IP, which most residential internet connections do, then you're going to want to set up dynamic DNS, which will automatically update the IP address on your domain. Now, this is something where every single registrar and dynamic DNS provider is going to be different. For most registrars, you use the DD client package. Many dynamic DNS providers will offer their own clients, and the exact credentials that you need to use may vary depending on who you're with. So unfortunately, you're going to need to look at support articles from your registrar or dynamic DNS provider to figure out how exactly to set this up with yours. Depending on which dynamic DNS provider you choose, you may be able to configure this in your router settings, as opposed to installing a dynamic DNS client on your server, which would make the process much simpler. But anyway, that's it for this video. Be sure to give it a like if you liked it, dislike if you disliked it, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and see you next time.